Hello out there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you wherever you are across the globe. I'm Tracy Hitchings, your host, transmitting from the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And you are tuned into Tracy's Prog World. My guest tonight here with me is Kev Rowland, who has for many years, well, he's actually been giving a great helping hand in keeping the seams together in the prog world as a critic, a writer, and as an author, most recent times in the Progressive Underground, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And Kev's going to be telling us about that. Actually, he's already zoomed in from New Zealand's beautiful North Island to share with us his story. So now that we're well and truly zoomed here, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Kev Rowland.
Thank you very much, Tracy. It's great to see you again. It's been quite a while since we were last together.
I know, it's been a very long time. I think you were pointing out to me, it was at some art gallery many years ago, with Cliff Horsey, wasn't it? I think that's
right.
I remember.
Yeah, and I don't think you were even in Landmark then. I think that was pre-Landmark, or it was just when you. But I mean, I was looking earlier, and yeah, we were doing an interview together back in 1993. That's 27 years ago.
Oh my gosh, you're going to give my age away in a minute. But it's great to have you here, Kev. Now, you know, I've known you over the years, as you just saying, around gigs, and you're a musical columnist, a critic, and you've been writing about so many different musicians, artists, songwriters, bands, etc., etc., etc. And you know, to share your joy and measurement within the music that you show such a great passion about. And I was just wanting to sort of bring up a bit of background so people get a flavour of who you are. They may have been reading your write-ups over the years, but what do they know of you? So just to say that you were born in Brixham, in Devon, in the UK, next to my very own county of Cornwall. And
yeah, but the better one with the better cream.
Oh, well, I was going to have an argument about the cream, actually, so we'll save that for later. So I totally disagree with you, of course. Now, by 1974, music was taking a very big impact on you, such as Black Sabbath, Ted Nugent, Deep Purple, Death Row. I'm sorry, I said Death Row Toll. How can I say that? Even Jethro Tull. I have to put my teeth back in. And that was at a time when your sister actually did suffer a stroke. So you were a young man then, so that must have been quite a lot to take in. And we will come to those things a bit later. And by 1977, your first live gig apparently was with Cliff Richard. So you started working in retail as well. And by 1980, your first prog gig was with Genesis on the Duke's tour. And metal gigs that you were loving were Saxton and Tigers of Pang Tang, Budgie and Bardis. And then as we swiftly move on, between 1981 and 1984, you did a degree and majored in economics. You studied computers and maths and saw great bands in between all that. And you met who was to become Sarah, your wife. And you took in a ready-made family, didn't you? And then made 2 more together, I believe. That was later on, I believe. You did become secretary of Rock Sig, which soon actually changed to the newsletter to the magazine called Feedback, which is where I start really remembering you from, you know. So you've been an analyst, you've been in management, in retail, and all sorts of things, but you've always kept up this thing with music. In fact, I'm realizing more now than ever just how much you've done since having done just a tiny amount of research on you. And I've been truly blown away with just how much you can do in one day, let alone a life. It's just amazing. So, you know, where to start? I was just curious about asking you with regards to being, you know, this is obviously about the Progressive Underground and other things, but what about that very first gig of Genesis that you went to on the Duke's tour? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. It was 1980, so 40 years ago. And Genesis announced they were going to do a small halls tour, and they started the tour at Paynton Festival Theatre, which was in the next town over from where I was. And I would have been 17, and everybody at school was talking about it, and we all tried to get tickets, because even those who didn't like Genesis or didn't even really know Genesis, and I didn't know them very well, we all knew it was a big event. So, went along to Paynton Festival Theatre, saw the band play in a very small, small stage, 1,500 people. And afterwards, a couple of us hung around, and I've still got Phil Collins and Chester Thompson's autograph from that night.
Really?
Still on a bit of tour merchandise. It's carefully folded inside the album.
Yeah.
But when they played the gig, the album even wasn't out then, so we didn't actually know any of the material because it hadn't been released. It wasn't released for a few weeks later, and of course, this is so long before the internet, so long before streaming and everything. If you didn't have the physical album or have a mate who had the physical album, basically you couldn't hear it. So yeah, that made a big impression on me, seeing Genesis and just being blown away by, obviously this was Phil, so it wasn't as theatrical, but the complexity of the music, I think it just really took me to a different place. And I immediately went off trying to find as much progressive rock as I could. At that period of time, obviously we had the new wave of British heavy metal that exploded in the UK. 1979 that started, and 1980 it's in full flow. So I'd got heavily into that because, again, 17 years old, I was the perfect age for it. But so I was following the two streams of different types of metal, exciting bands like Iron Maiden, Saxon, all this sort of thing. But then seeing Genesis, it just started to take me into a different area of music. And I'd always been interested in Jethro Tull, but this took me far more into other bands and started investigating what most people think of as mainstream prog, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Genesis and Gentle Giant and Yes and King Crimson. They're the bands that everybody knows. And I can remember when the Asia album came out in '82, I was absolutely blown away. I thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever heard. But it's interesting because if you ever read Chas Snyding's book, The Strawberry Brick's Guide to Progressive Rock, he ends it in '82. But as far as he's concerned, progressive rock stopped in '82, right?
Wow.
So when we chat, we talk about the fact our books are the Bibles. He's the Old Testament and I'm the New Testament. We're just missing 8 years in between, although I do capture some of them. But, and it felt like that. And it was, for me, when then I ended up in London in '85. So I worked all the way around London, all this sort of thing.
Can I ask you a question in there? Is that how the neo-progressive rock thing came in?
I think the original neo-prog scene, if you think of when the bands blew up, Pendragon Palace, 12th Night, Marillion, etc., they came really out of the indie scene, which had come up with the out of punk, really. So at the end of the '70s, you had the indie bands starting to release their own material. So some of the progressive bands started to do that, as did heavy metal bands. The issue with the progressive scene was the critics loved it in the early '70s and hated it in the late '70s and the '80s. And so the only reason that Marillion crashed through the door was because of Fish. I'm pretty sure that it was due to his being such a charismatic, painted front man, and he's such a tall, imposing figure. As you know, he's such a lovely guy when you meet him in person, but when on stage, he's a different beast. And you think back, there was the famous Hammersmith Odeon gig when it was Marillion, 12th Night and Palace. Everybody thought the bands were all going to break through, but the only one that did break through was Marillion. And the other bands never got the publicity, so they were working hard. So Jadis, Hayes, Mark Kwan, Tamarisk, they were all around, Solstice, Quasar, they were all around. They were all around, and they were all playing the Marquee and all reasonably sized venues, but they never got any publicity. And one of the things that really annoys me now, and it's you know, you always have regrets. One of my regrets is I didn't see Thin Lizzy when I should have done. You know, you always look back. But I was in London when 12th Night were playing. I was in London when Tamarisk were around and all these other bands. I didn't know anything about them, so I never went to see them. If I'd known about them, I would have gone to see them. But this is pre-internet. Mass media hates it. So it's basically word of mouth. And at the time, I wasn't part of the scene. That only came later when when I got involved in the early 90s. And then I look back and I still regret not seeing 12th Night.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that Clive Mitten only agreed to do the reunion when he came back from Australia pretty much the same month as I went to New Zealand. So,
Why do you think the mass media didn't like it? What do you think? Do you think there's something more behind it than just not wanting to like it? Is it because it was independently starting to do well in certain ways and people were choosing to listen to it instead of this manufactured stuff? Or how do you think it is it not to do with that from your point of view? Because you've had a deeper look into these things than most people, because you're a writer and you get into these conversations incredibly so. What's your take on that?
I think it's just a belief that if it's on the radio, that's what you're going to talk about. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. So, you know, John Peel, who anybody who loves independent music that holds him up in high esteem, and I certainly do, absolutely amazing man. He once said that Emerson, Lake and Palmer were a waste of electricity. And when punk came through, there seemed to be the view in the critics' mind that it was time for bands like Yes and Pink Floyd and that sort of thing. Remember, this is 76, 77, and these bands were releasing some classic albums.
Yeah.
You look back at the music that was coming out at that time, Genesis and all these others, and they just basically tried to destroy them. And again, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, bands like Genesis, they morphed into pop. Yes went through and have been through a million lineup changes since the classic days.
Yeah.
But what's kept all these bands going is actually not the mass media. It's not album sales anymore, apart from Genesis became a pop band. It's gigs. You know, people will still go and see. You know, if Genesis announced a tour tomorrow and there's rumors, they will just do arenas. Yep. King Crimson, rabid fans all over the world. They can tour wherever they like, whenever they like. But if a new King Crimson was starting now, and in fact, you know, this is the main reason why I've done what I've done for so long, because I hear bands that I think are as good as that. They can't get the audience, they can't get the people to understand what they're doing. And I think I was listening to your last show with Marianne earlier.
Oh, Marianne,
and
yes.
and she said about the fact that it's really difficult to get people to hear the music too. And she was saying she set up a Spotify list and all this sort of thing. And that's why I keep doing what I'm doing, and have been now for more than 30 years, because if I can turn some people on to some music, and there are some strange people who actually do follow my writings apparently, you know, and because I get comments, but I mean, for me, it's all about trying to shine a light. And that's what it's always been about, is trying to shine a light. And the reason I put the books together was, it was Chaz's fault, because his book ended in 1982 and it annoyed me. And I read the first edition of his book in 2011, and I got quite angry over it, and I wrote quite a lot of notes in it about bands that I needed to check out and this sort of thing. But it just kept.
What put on your annoyance about that?
It stopped.
Right.
It stopped.
Yeah.
Where was my scene? Where were my bands? Where was my music?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to embarrass you by reading out what I wrote about you in the review of your debut solo album, because I was reading it earlier. But you know, I basically said you were one of the best singers in the UK, and why the hell weren't the media talking about you? So,
thank you.
Yeah, you know, why? What I was going to do about it? And it took 3 years for me to finally thinking about it, to actually say to someone, I'm thinking of doing this. Do you think it's a good idea? And he then said, oh, you don't know, I run a book company. I went, well, no. He said, you write it, I'll publish it. And that's literally how it happened.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to say thank you to you on behalf of, I'm sure, everybody out there that's listening into here, because it's people like yourselves who keep this alive, that give us the opportunity, because I've gone in through those books and I've been quite intrigued by some of the things I didn't know. You know, because things become a little unconnected in certain ways because people are trying to do their life as well. You know, you're quite an extreme person who can do an amazing, you know, day's work and come home and still do all this stuff and keep, I mean, it really is truly quite amazing, Kevin. The more I get into it, the more I think that you might just be superhuman.
It's a conversation that myself and a writer I admire, Olaf Bjornsson, have quite often, because we work together on a couple of different websites. And Olaf started about 15 years ago, so he's not been doing it as long as me, but his output is prolific, and he specializes in getting everybody's press release published out on the web in a couple of different places, as well as running Spotify of all new bands that are coming through. And we both write for a couple of different sites, such as Progressor. Progressor is the oldest, as far as I'm aware, is the oldest continuously running progressive rock website in the world. Started and still run from Uzbekistan. Yeah. And started in 1998, which is right at the very beginning of the internet. And we're the two main writers for that, and we keep it going. But you know, we say that one of the issues these days that we find, and why we keep doing what we're doing, is you don't see the people coming through with the commitment. Yeah. And I think that's because we started it when I started when I was in my 20s. Olaf probably started in his probably his 20s. He's a bit younger than me. But it's these days, there's so many different things to focus on. When I was growing up, we had 3 TV channels that weren't on during the day, and they shut down at night, and you used to get the national anthem played to you as I was turning off. There was radio, but there was one rock show which started in about 1978 on a Friday evening, which we all listened to. Yeah. No internet. We got all our information from weekly broadsheet music newspapers, Sounds, NME, Record Collector, Record Mirror, and all this sort of thing. But we didn't have the distractions of internet, yes, mobile phones, gaming, always being connected, Facebook, because there was nothing like it. I grew up and I used to listen to music. I would go to my room and put on a record, and I would read the lyrics, and I would look at the artwork. Listening to music was a thing you did, and you did nothing else. Whereas these days, a lot of people listen to music. Well, they may have it playing, but they're not really listening to it whilst they're doing the housework, whatever. There's just, the world has changed. Some ways for a lot better. Obviously, the fact that we're having a video call now, you know, you're in Queensland, I'm in Auckland, which is awesome. And, you know, I can swap messages with, well, Marion's in Guernsey, and we swap messages, like, you know, we're chatting to each other and all this sort of thing in real time. But we didn't have that when I was young.
It is like that, isn't it? Because for me, you know, it's the pros and cons to everything, but it's the shift and change and getting used to it. Because I like the days, like you, when I really would listen to music. I would really love getting that album and pulling out that sleeve. And I know we've all had that beautiful experience of looking at the artwork and playing that piece of vinyl. And of course, we went on to from cassettes to vinyl to CD. And now you're right, we're not listening in the same way, because it's not just distractions, it is the way that life is taking us if we want to keep up with it. And it's not settled into something yet, because it's still going through its change, isn't it? So we're caught in that, aren't we? We're caught right in that. So I don't know where the pros and cons begin and end, because I do know it's just like you said, I would not be having this conversation with you now and looking at you right now, you in New Zealand, me in Australia, like you say Marion in Guernsey the other day. So it's fantastic. Oh my gosh, it means I can publish without a record company coming in between. Do you know what I mean? And take out the middleman, so to speak. But on the other hand, the responsibility and the amount of time you have to engage into all this stuff, which pretty much, this is an area that you are very good at though, isn't it? Because you know, you've studied in computers, and so you're kind of part way there, aren't you? Or a very big way there. I haven't, so it's very I can't remember the last time I picked up my guitar since I started this. There's more to it. Yeah, it's I'm not a technical person on any level. I've never liked computers. I just look at them and want to throw them away before I've even bought them, you know. But now I've had to embrace this. So it's like you're saying, it is great, but it has taken something else away, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has. And you know, if we think about what you just said, actually, about, you know, you're cutting out the middleman and all this sort of thing, you're an artist with, as far as I'm concerned, you've got real pedigree. You've, you know, pick highlights: Quasar, Solo, Landmark. You know, the amount of stuff you've done with Clive Nolan. I think I actually said to you the other day in an email, outside of any tracks on Camel's The Snow Goose, which is my most played album,
Wonderful.
the most played song, according to Last FM, because I track everything through Last FM, is Unexpected Guest, which is the song that you sang on Alchemy. And to be perfectly honest, my youngest daughter and I, she used to, if we were in the car, she would often ask me to play that one song, not the album, just that one song, which is why it ended up where it is. So to me, that song always makes me think not only of you, but of my daughter.
I've got to remember singing Unexpected Guest on Alchemy. And that's not that long ago, is it? It's, you know, it's not.
You performed it on the live show as well in Poland.
It's that the two of us, we're at the front of the stage, and it's like this kind of, is it the argument one, or this kind of
Yes, it's the argument. You're the maid, you're playing the part of the maid or something, and he comes in and you think he's going to steal the silverware.
That's right. That's right. I'm saying he's not going to steal the silverware. Yes, that's right. Thank you for bringing that back to me. Of course I know it. You know when you've done so many things, it takes a moment sometimes. That's hilarious.
But what I meant, where I was leading with that was,
that's got the most play. You saying that's got the most play on FM?
On my set, on what I've been recording since 2007, it's the most played song.
Really? So your daughter, they like that, and normally you think the songs would be the ones where people get drawn to. You know, you get drawn to. So that's a surprise. That's a surprise.
I think my kids have also been brought up with some very weird music. I have pictures of Elizabeth, who's my number 2 daughter, when she was, and to the point that I've got photos of her sat on the puffy in the front room with my headphones on, playing that album. And we went on holiday to Devon. We were living in Surrey at the time. She demanded it was taken in the car and be played almost constantly. And she was 6. And I happened to mention this to Clive one day. We were over his place in Victoria. Virginia.
Virginia.
Not the second.
Yeah.
Yes, the second place. And I happened to mention that to him, and he said, next time you come over, because I used to go over a lot, he said, next time you come over, bring her. So I did. And I ended up interviewing Shadowland in the pub, and my daughter sat there and nicked all of Ian's crisps, you know. But you've got a pedigree. Going back to the original point, you've got a pedigree, right? So you can release stuff. If you decided you weren't going to invest in a CD, but you're going to release something digitally,
yes,
right? You can make that available. You've got a pedigree, right? Now, back in the day, if you wanted to release a CD, you had to make a certain investment, financial investment, you know, whether it was you or the label, would have to make a financial investment.
Yes.
So that actually, in some ways, it cut out a lot of dross, but at the same time, some good bands did go to the side. I'm not disputing that. But these days, anybody and their dog can actually sit and create something and release it digitally. And it's becoming harder to pick out what's worth listening to and what's not.
Yes.
And it's weird for me because, when I started doing this in the 90s, I used to sometimes get sent vinyl. Then I was getting sent tapes, and Island Records, for example, at that time used to send out white label cassettes, actual white label cassettes of an album. The first band ever to send me a CD was Final Conflict, and their debut CD, Redress the Balance. what was that, about 91, 92, somewhere around there. They were the first band ever to send me a CD. So we used to get all the CDs. Now these days, I get sent very few CDs. Very, very few. That
Really?
hardly any record labels send them out anymore as promos. They're all just, I just have to get told it's on the digital platform, go and get it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't even see the physical product anymore.
So it's become a bit impersonal, hasn't it? In that way, yeah, my goodness. And I think that's what we're all kind of been going through. I felt a sort of a disassociation with things because of this. You know, that personable stuff that was in all my early days in the Prog thing, when you were there, you were together, that you get excited about the next product coming out, and the record company or the distribution companies, oh, you can have 10 Trace there, and you can have take your 10 albums and go and give it to your granny, or you know, that's gone. So the great stuff that goes, you know, that I did go with that, you know, I don't know if it's half a dozen of one and six of the rest. Sometimes, you know, we just go through these times, these changes, and yeah, that's you've really made me just think about that now in this light.
These days, I am very, very careful how much music I accept to review, because I work on three simple rules. It used to be, if you asked me to review something, I'd review it, but I've got myself in a hell of a state. So where I am now is, if you send me a physical CD, I will review it.
Yeah.
If you are a band or an artist and you contact me directly, I will always review it.
Yeah.
And if I choose to download it, I review it. So I probably get offered between 20 and 30 albums a week.
I know that you're saying you've been flooded with in recent times with wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because of the books, because of the progressive underground.
The first thing that the books did was they stopped me from writing, and I was telling people, don't send me stuff, don't send me stuff, don't send me stuff, and they were still sending it to me, and like an idiot, I kept grabbing it. So I've been trying really, really hard to get it under control, but where I am at the moment is so far, I'm actually on Even Stevens at the moment.
Yeah.
As of Sunday, I had reviewed so far this year 489 albums.
Outrageous.
I have 489 albums to review. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm currently working on the most recent one. So I'm currently finishing off April. Hopefully I'll get April done this weekend. Then I start May.
That's just amazing. I mean, it's outrageous. You kind of answered a couple of questions already there, by the way. You know, why do you still write about music more than 30 years later? Whereas you said that already, so you included that just now. So that, I mean, it's just amazing. You don't kind of say no too easily, but you have started to have to get some form of, you know, how do you get to the good stuff? How do you know, you've got to start making a few rules, because you just can't go through everything. You know,
and the problem is, when you get a new one come through and you just get offered it, you have no idea. If I wasn't doing what I'm doing, I wouldn't have come across these people. You know, back in the 90s, it was, I've always loved your work, Tracy, you know that. But I mean, stuff that you're doing, Clive was doing, Threshold, Spock's Beard, Galahad, Landmark, all of them. You know, I've been a fan of Damien's voice for years and still am. And in fact, the very first time I saw Landmark was at the Standard, and I was... Landmark were the headline, and there was this little support act of a singer and a keyboard player. And for the encore, you and Clive sang the vocals. Clive couldn't remember the words, even though he'd written it. And he's on stage with the booklet, reading the words. You and him are singing, and Damien's just jumping around the stage, having fun.
I knew you were going to say that as soon as you started talking about that. I do remember that. Don't you remember those times? I remember Clive standing there and holding his own booklet to his own lyrics.
Yeah, that he wrote. Yeah, that he couldn't remember.
Those are the times. And yeah, Damien jumping up and down, because he was always very excited in those days. Oh, that's so funny. Going back to the Standard. I don't even know if it's still a gig now, actually. You know, but we had some great times there. Yeah.
You know, you remember going there and playing there in the 70s, you know.
Yeah. Oh gosh, how change happens, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember that time, during the time that we were kind of cut, you know, by the time I was in Landmark, all the gigs had started closing down and turning into
Yep.
discos. And couldn't even believe the marquee, because I played it with Quasar. I can't remember what other bands I played it with this second, but I remember when that was just such a beloved gig. And I was saying to Mary, we could go off to the San Moritz afterwards, and there everybody was, and you know, like Lemmy always played the fruit machines, like I was saying before with Marion, and those were beloved times. And then it wasn't so long later that all of a sudden we were gigging, and it was almost, it turned into a disco afterwards. Well, it actually did, but it wasn't the same kind of appreciation of bands. It's like, right, now you finished, bugger off. The whole
Yeah.
attitude and situation and management had shifted into this new, and it was very upsetting actually to see this thing that you thought you were part of, feel it crumbling. But it's what changes actually. It's called
But
shift.
it's funny.
You know.
It's funny you saying that, because obviously I've been reading through the gig reviews in Volume 3 recently, because obviously I've been proofing it. And there's one in there where there was IQ. IQ were headline, Big Train with the first band on, and it was, I can't remember who was in the middle. There were 3 bands that night. And I actually bemoaned the fact that the gig was on so early, because afterwards they were having a disco.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was at the Astoria.
Yeah. Astoria. Oh, goodness me, really? So
Yeah, and they were having a big disco Friday night, so everybody had to be finished and out, I think, before 10, because the disco started.
yeah.
And I remember going past, I remember seeing various bands at the marquee. Last time I looked, I'm pretty sure it's the Weatherspoons now.
Don't, you spoil the illusion. But it's, you know, it is, you might not believe it, but it is part of progress. It becomes progress in the long run, but when you're going through it and you were part of something and you see that melt down in front of your eyes and there's just nothing you can do about it, it is pretty devastating in some ways when you consider who played in some of those places and how renowned it was. And you know, the signing of autographs afterwards, and it was, this is a rock venue, you know, this is where you come and discover people daring to try new things. And all of a sudden you're quick, get off out, we're doing a disco now. I mean, gosh, no,
Yeah.
that is not good.
Well, the first time I saw Damien, in fact, I've only ever seen Damien play solo once, just him and an acoustic. And that was on the Love Ambassadors tour, because it was Shadowland, it was Jadis, Shadowland, and Damien. And the reason it was Damien was because it was supposed to be Jeff, and he was really ill at the time. And the reason it came into my head, because you said about signing, and we all signed this massive card for Jeff. All of us there, yeah, we're all going and we all signed it. And of course, he passed away not long afterwards, which was awful. But yeah,
Isn't it? Yeah, I think it really hit so many people. Just unbelievable.
yeah. And at the time, again, yeah, I can't remember when Jeff died. It was in the early to mid 90s, wasn't it? Yeah. Again, it was long before email. So what I did, I wanted to do a tribute to him. So I wrote to lots of the people in the scene that I knew, who I thought may have had some contact with him, and asked them for their comments. So in this book, in volume 3, when it comes out, you've got the thoughts of the Jeff Mann band, because that was the last one going. You got the thoughts of, obviously, Peter Nichols was devastated, Martin Orford, Greg Sport, and Stu Nicholson, Dave Rushton from Grace, all these people, Nick, and a whole lot of others. And but I did that because it, there was no big deal. To me, I can honestly say when Jeff died, I was devastated. And then not long after that, SI Music released Live and Let Live. And the first song I played was Love Song, which was actually the last song on the set. And I sat in front of the stereo and I cried my heart out, because it was I knew it was the last song he ever sang with 12th Night, and he'd gone. He's the only one who's actually really upset me, if you like. And that's, when you think over the years, all the big rockers and that have gone, but no, for some reason he hit me really personally at the time, and I still listen to his music. Just an incredible man.
It's quite funny that you say that, because I've heard that from a few others, that it really truly hit them. That was just such a major loss. He was a beautiful man. Marion and I, the other week, we were doing a bit of a memoriam, and I just, I can't believe John Wetton's gone. I just can't fathom it. I just, it's just too shocking, that, why? Too early, too ridiculous, far too much music left in the guy. One of the most brilliant songwriters, and I've had the greatest pleasure to work with. And I just, it's going to happen to us all. It's a part of life. Death is a part of life. But it just hits you when these people that have given so much and they've been through their traumas in life, and So it is, and I can totally get what you're saying.
Well, John, a lot of John's albums are reviewed. Obviously, his recent albums are reviewed in the book, but I still think the Sub Rosa acoustic live album that he did with Martin and Dave Kilminster, and I'm not quite sure, I can't remember who was the drummer. It may have been Steve Christie thinking about it, but it's a beautiful set. His voice is powering out and just picked guitars as opposed to electric, and you're going, and Martin on piano, and it's just absolutely stunning. It's still one of my favorite albums, and is an album that I always carry with me. Now these days, I've got a 120 gig iPod, which is always full, and it's mostly full of music I need to review, but there's a set of albums I always have with me. Yours is one. Clive Nolan, both, a lot of Clive stuff is on there. The first Shadowland album is on there. But yeah, Sub Rosa is always one of them. Yeah. Always have that with me.
My favourite, when I was doing those gigs with him, doing all the bands, from Asia to King Crimson to UK, doing backup vocals for all those, and I still my heart just sits with Battle Lines. I don't know if you know the Battle Lines album.
I do.
I just love that album. I just love it. It melts my heart.
Yeah. Trying to think when Battle Lines came out.
Was I saying to Marion the other week, I'm pretty sure it made number 19 in the American charts at the time. And I think that was Battle Lines itself. I hope I got that right, because it's twice I've said it now.
Well, if it didn't, it should have done.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And he was in such fine form for those gigs that we did. He was in a really cleaned up area of himself, and I'd read some of his book as well at that time. I've read it all now, but I was just blown away by his intelligence, his real intelligence and wisdom, even though he was in a lot of trauma at times. So yeah, just blown away with that. So,
well, he had a hell of a musical career. You just look at the bands he was in. I mean, you've named the progressive bands. What about Wishbone Ash and Uriah Heep? And he just seemed to play with everyone at one point.
I mean, and again, why do you think that and you've kind of answered it, but not exactly. Why do you think it would be a good idea spending 2.5 years compiling all of the reviews to all the drafts, and then spend another 2.5 years taking proofing, digging out artwork, etc.? Let's get back to that.
I think the short thing is someone had to do it. And the thing for me, the reason I've always done this is try to shine a light. And I just realized that I had never seen anything in a book form written about any of my bands. Yes, you can buy a Galahad biography. Yes, you can buy a 12th Night biography. They were basically done in conjunction with the band. But you actually don't have anything that's looking across the spectrum. And I realized that I was sat on a wealth of material. And I felt that it needed to go out. Initially, the idea was it would be a book. But the problem I had was there's so much. So to give you an idea of context, the Lord of the Rings is 475,000 words, right? Pretty big. Yeah, everyone knows Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Well, the first draft of my book was 515,000 words. And I had less than half of it saved digitally, because I started this magazine using an electronic typewriter with 1K of memory. Now, what that allowed me to do I had a little tiny screen on the typewriter. So literally you could see about 3 or 4 words on it, right? So what you do is you go through and write it all, and then you hit print, and then you would print it all out, and then you look to see if there's any mistakes, and then you've got to go back through a backspace through everything on that 1K of memory to the where you need to change the word. And it was about 1.5 pages of print, so I had nothing saved electronically. I tried to use something called optical character recognition, where you basically scan it, but the copies were so poor that you couldn't do it. After I had the typewriter, I had an Amstrad computer, so again, none of that was saved. So I literally had to sit down with old photocopied A5 magazines and go through and pick everything out and type it up. And when I first had it printed, I had it printed by Warehouse Stationery over here, so I had something I could work on physically, and it was about 3 inches thick. That was just typewritten, and I worked through that. But it took me 2.5 years to get it to that stage. Then it took about a year to get the publisher to actually get to working on it, because he kept saying it was too big, it was too big, it was too big, and he needed to think about it and all this sort of thing. Then he said to me, we're going to break it down into 3 volumes, but I need all the artwork. So then I had to go back and I had to get all the artwork. For some strange reason, I decided many years ago that although every so often I would have to get rid of CDs just due to room, because and I've probably I have got rid of thousands over the years. We moved within the UK a few times and moved to the other side of the world, so I haven't got anything like what I did have. But I never got rid of a single cassette. And the reason for that was I got rid of pre-recorded tapes that were of commercially available albums, but every demo I ever was sent, I still have, because I decided very early on that one day I may be the only person who's got this. So I kept them. So it meant that all the cassettes in there that you see are scans from my own copies of the tapes that I still have. But the other problem I had with the first volume as well is that good old John, he was running an old version of Publisher. I didn't have Publisher. So literally we did 11 proofs, and what happened was he would do it in Publisher. He would send it to me as a PDF. I'd print the PDF. Then I'd literally have to write out in Word all the corrections. Then you'd have to make the corrections. Then I'd go through it again. That took 11 attempts. And what's really frustrating is there's a wrong piece of artwork in there. From and it's for a band, an obscure band called Holy Lamb, right? They're still going. They thanked me for putting them in their book, and I went, oh no. So we got it sorted out better for volume 2. I got Publisher, and I made John upgrade, so we were on the same version of Publisher. That took about 6 proofs, and this one took about 3. So I've got faster and I've got better.
I was going to, because I've been starting to look up at a couple of things, and I was going to say, which of the bands are still going? Because that's the interesting thing about compiling these things, to have the history that was there. That's what's great, to have that history, Well, some things aren't there anymore doing it, but they've been there and they gave it a bloody good go, and yeah.
I mean, look, the way this started, the way the whole thing started, right, was you said in the introduction that it started off as the newsletter for Mensa's rock music special interest group. Well, the reason was I'd actually joined Mensa because I was working in London. I didn't know anybody, and I thought there might be someone in Mensa that I could go for drinks with. And there's 35,000 members of Mensa in the UK at that time. So I joined and I found that actually I had virtually nothing in common with the 35,000 people. But soon after I joined, someone wanted to start up this little newsletter. So I joined in right from the beginning, and I started running it in 1990. And then I was out with a guy called Keith Richardson in 1991, who was a Menson and a member of the group. And he lived in Kingston and I was living in Great Bookham. And we were out and we're talking about music. You know, we're bound to be talking about music. And he said to me, "Oh, I've brought some stuff along for you." And he brought along some copies of Night Moves, which was 12th Night's newsletter, and some 12th Night music, and some Galahad music, and some copies of a fanzine called Blindsight. So I loved I loved all the music I heard, and I particularly fell in love with Galahad. And I wrote to Stu, as you did, because you had to do it by letter. And I sent him a check, as you did, because there's no electronic bank transfers. And I bought Nothing Is Written, the CD that had just come out, and the previous album, Moment of Madness, which was a cassette. And and in my letter, I said I ran this little newslettery fanzine sort of thing, you know, because it hadn't really got going at the time. It didn't even have a name back then. And a couple of weeks later, a tape turned up in the post from Big Big Train. It was their first demo called From the River to the Sea, which they then re-recorded as their first album. And I sat there going, yeah, they sent me there was some photo, typical new band. There was no information. I didn't know who anybody was in the photos. I had a letter from someone called Greg. I had some photos. I didn't know who any of them were because they didn't say who was who on the photos. And I had a tape. And I'm going, I didn't ask for this. Someone sent me some music and I haven't paid for it. Now, I admit to being a music addict. There is no cure, right? But I went, someone has sent me music I haven't paid for. This is weird. And I look, oh, they're from Dorset. Well, if they're from Dorset, then Stu Nicholson must have told about them because I was writing to him recently and he's in Dorset. Oh, there's all these addresses in the back of Blindsight. I wonder if I write to all these bands and I say that I write about music. I wonder if they'll send me music I haven't paid for as well. And it's been going downhill ever since. Yeah, but that's how it started.
Yeah.
Literally. So yeah, so Greg kindly wrote some blurb for the back of volume 1 because literally I was one of the very first people to ever write about them. And funnily enough, for their last big tour of the UK, because they're actually quite a big band now, you know, they play big venues, I got approached by someone who was putting their program together and he said, I hear you have copies of their 2 cassettes. Can you scan them in high res for me, please? Because no one's got them anymore and we'll want to put it in the program.
Excellent. You talk about cassettes. I still keep some of my old cassettes and I play them. They're very and the machines. I've got one machine that will still play them.
Yeah.
Because we did bring out a cassette with was it Landmark Express? Oh, I can't remember now. But yes, we did have something on cassette. So
Oh, did you? I didn't know that.
yes, it might have been I've got to dig it out, but there's definitely something on cassette. I'm quite proud of having a cassette because they're on CDs, you know. Yeah.
Well, I would really like to have the demo tape that Landmark did, which got them the record deal, because Landmark had it's funny. I was telling this to Steve. Because in the review of the first Landmark album, I've actually put quite a lot of history in there, which I must have been given by Steve Lee at the time, because Steve Lee and I were the ones who were writing, and this is Steve G. And I realized that he's got some history wrong on the website, so I had to point out, no, this is actually what happened, because they changed singers multiple times before the first album. So they recorded was it the demo tape, and then they recorded that with one singer, but then they got a recording deal, so they recorded that with another singer, and then by the time they actually came to do the album, they actually had the recording deal, but it was only after that Damien took over.
Yes.
You know, forgetting all the other bits of the history. Yeah. So
history, because I was actually the first singer for Landmark, but through contractual situations,
yes,
I was denied.
I only found that out a lot later. I didn't know that at the time. It was kept away from me. Yeah. So it was only a lot later that I found that out, because I knew you initially from Quasar, because Keith sent me The Lorelei was the first CD, and which I reviewed back only 28 years ago. Um, and then I got things like, obviously, I got in touch with Clive quite quickly. It all exploded very fast for me, and the reason for that was there was no one writing about it. And back then, I was putting a magazine out. I started off every 3 months, then it was every 2 months. For a while, I tried every 6 weeks. That didn't work out very well for me. And I was putting out at least a double issue every month. It had to be a double because the staplers were only so big. And I got blocked down to an 80-page limit, right? So I got told I couldn't have an issue bigger than 80 pages. So that's fine. I just released 2 at once. And I was writing all of the main issue. So I was generally writing 80 pages a month. It was renamed after I left. I asked for the name to be changed. I said I couldn't stand anybody else running feedback, and it's now called Amplified, and it's now been going for 30 years. It's not as big anymore. I still write about half of it.
Why?
Because I do. That's what I do. And what I do now is I work with various websites and different magazines, and literally what I do is every Sunday night, New Zealand time, I send out whatever I've written for the week, and it's up to them if they use it or not. If the artist is listed on Prog Archives or Metal Music Archives, I list that. I put the review up there as well. Apart from that, it just goes straight out to those other labels and websites. They can do what they like with it.
Curiosity I have, because you had quite a serious biking accident in those years. I think it was about 1998, and it was a very serious bike accident. And obviously that was in your time of being within feedback, and you also you've got your other full-time job as an analyst, and you've been in retail, serious management and IT and all sorts. But going back to that bike accident, recovering from that and obviously being involved, how did that work? How did you take time out of the writing in that time?
I mean, basically the accident was, I was on my way home. We were going to take the kids out to see Dr. Dolittle with Eddie Murphy. It was in the cinema. The kids wanted to see it. And I was riding home, and I was a classic right turn victim. A woman drove her car into me, basically. I hit her above the front wheel arch. I was luckily only doing about 40 miles an hour in a 60-mile-an-hour zone. So that was lucky. And I span through the air, and I landed flat on my back with my right arm beneath me. I broke my right arm in 6 places. The bone came out in 3. I had 3 titanium plates put in. I broke a couple of ribs, but I never really felt those. And that, that happened literally the day that issue 50 hit the streets. Issue 50 was a celebration of everything we'd done. It was 300 pages long. It was a triple issue. I had giveaways, I had prizes, I hit every band and label I knew. I said, I want a t-shirt, I want a CD, I don't care what it is, you're going to give it to me. So I'd sign stuff and everything else. And I can remember I'd been taken out of the ER ward and up into a normal ward whilst I'm waiting for the operation, because obviously I had to go a severe operation. Sarah stood next to me in a state of shock, and I was giving her the phone numbers of Stu Nicholson of Galahad, Mark Colton of Credo Free Will, and Steve Payne of Legend, saying you need to ring these guys and let them know that what's going on. No email back then. And she also rang Mensa, who put out a note saying that I'd been in a serious bike accident, and everything was going to be delayed for a while. But the amount of support I got back then, from not only from work, I was off work totally for 6 weeks, and then I worked from home for 6 weeks. And basically what happened was I turned the computer on in the morning, and this is the old days of modem connections, actually taking up the phone line. And I'd connect up about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was doing 4 hours work a day and 3 hours thinking time, because my doctor said I could only do 4 hours, and that's how Safeway said that's what we're going to do. And my boss would ring me every morning, and he'd go, what sort of night have you had? Because I was in an awful lot of pain. I'm not a religious person. I was brought up in the church, and I'm not a religious person at all anymore, but I do believe there's karma. What comes around goes around, and treat others as you want to be treated.
Oh, so
And that's what I live by. And I have never once regretted doing what I've done that way. You know, it's always come back to me in some way or another.
I love that. I love that, Kevin. That's just so lovely. I love that. And what I'm curious also about, I know that you at some point, not long, a couple of years after your accident, you were back at work at some point, and I've got a feeling it might have been in, to do with Yorkshire and England. I don't know if I'm getting something mixed up here, but I know at one point that you found yourself closing down about 250 supermarkets.
Mm.
Can I ask a question? Later on, after having done that can't have been easy. Did that have anything to do with health issues in around 2005 that you were set back with, or was that a separate thing? Because you did go into some possibly emotional health issues, diagnosed with depression. And I know, because I've been there myself, I fought that myself. So I'm just curious as to how that came about for you, if you're able to offer anything on that.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a lot of things. We moved to Yorkshire. Basically what happened, I used to work for Safeway stores, and people in the UK may remember that in 2003, they were approached to be taken over by Morrison's supermarkets, and that actually happened in 2004. And part of that was, according to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission. I had to think what they were called then, because they're something different over here, and I've forgotten. I was going to say Comcom, and I went, no, that's not right. But they said they had to close a load of supermarkets. So they put me into what they call golden handcuffs. What that meant was I couldn't afford to leave, because they were putting a lot of bonuses into my final pay. And my last job was literally, I worked out how to turn 80 stores from a Safeway to a Morrison, and then my job was to shut 250 supermarkets. Combination of direct closure and being sold to Gateways or Tesco's or Waitrose or whoever.
Volume of work, or other pressures that are coming in from
it was a lot of it was just the work. It didn't help that we'd moved up to Yorkshire, and I'm not going to say this is the same about the whole of Yorkshire, but the place where we lived, which was an ex-mining community, was misogynistic and racist, and we just couldn't cope with it. We really couldn't cope with it as a family.
You don't mean yourself as a so-called foreigner going into that area, but you mean racist differently?
Yeah, no, they were, well, first off, they hated anybody whose grandfather didn't work down the pit, so that was, but yeah, that's fine. But actually, I mean, my wife was working in a school, and it was announced that for India Week, they were going to have some Indian ladies come in and show the kids, and this is primary kids, junior, primary, not even junior, primary, how to make Indian sweets, right? You know, to show. Half the children were kept off school because they didn't want Indians in the school. So I'm hoping it's changed now, but that's what it was then. And there were all these pressures and everything, and I literally just cracked. And I understand it now. I've got a chemical imbalance in the brain, and I still do. So what that means is I know the triggers. I know what's going to make it bad for me. So I watch my workload very carefully. And when I say my workload, I don't mean work. Work's fine. Work is work. But I'm talking about all the stuff I do outside. Yes. And it's funny because Olav's in Norway, but we speak a lot of the time, and we keep watching out for each other. Yes. Because we're both aware that both of us have a tendency to take on too much, and then we suffer. So we watch each other. So that's why I now have the 3 rules. It's why I, for quite a long time, I ran one of the subgenre teams on Prog Archives. Yeah. What? And I don't do it now, but most people don't even know they exist. To get onto Prog Archives, you have to pass a committee. You literally have to pass a committee. So once, if a band is submitted, It's decided what genre, what subgenre of prog they fit into, whether it's Canterbury or neo prog or crossover prog or all this sort of thing, and it gets sent to the team. And if the team do not approve you, that's it. Boom. For example, it doesn't matter what you've done. So, like, take Clive for example, right? Just because he's on there for Shadowland and he's on there for all these other, Clive Nolan had to be put through as a, and I don't always agree. I've had bands calling onto Prog Archives that I was going, no, they're not prog, and other bands have gone, what do you mean you're not putting them on PA? Which is why I like working on the other sites as well, because, for example, on Progressor, basically what we do there is Olav writes what I call the detailed review. So Olav will spend ages writing a detailed review of an album. Now, he will only work from physical CDs, right? That's his rule.
Right.
He will only work from physical. And the reviews are huge. They're really impressive. Whereas I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I will sit down and I will write. My normal writing routine is if I sit down, I have to write 5 reviews.
Yeah, right. Yes, and that's what I was saying. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you then. It's just what you're saying is very important. But for you, is there a sense of duty in there somewhere as well? There's a sense of
huge.
So it's not. It's passion, but there's a duty in there behind that. So it's like you've been gifted a really massive task in order to keep an account on something that's taken place in the universe, and it's important to get it out there so it can always be looked back on. When we're dust, 200 years time, 2,000 years time, will still exist. So well, we will anyway, but you know what?
Well, I think the thing for me, what drives me is a term I use sometimes when I'm describing music is, for me, a lot of the music that comes out of the charts is plastic. Yeah. It's throwaway, it's disposable, and it's all the bloody same. Yeah. Right? Whereas, you look at something that's been crafted. Now, I listened to a single the other day, which got an amazing video behind it by a Kiwi artist, and I actually described it as being formed out of kauri. Now, kauri is a very important tree here in New Zealand, and in fact, they dig kauri out of the swamp. So swamp kauri can be thousands and thousands of years old, and they're made into furniture and that. But there's real depth, there's polish, there's care, there's love, there's attention to detail. And to me, the difference between something that's been created and crafted against something that's plastic, but the plastic thing makes the money. You and I have both been around the prog scene for a long time. There are very few musicians in the prog scene who make their living out of playing prog. They don't do it for money. They don't do it for recognition. They do it because they have to and because they love the music. Yes. They're not doing it necessarily to be famous. To me, I can't see me ever stopping writing. It's like breathing. I tried. When we moved to New Zealand, I made a commitment I was not going to write. I'd spent years wrapped up behind a computer, and I wasn't going to do it. And I moved to New Zealand and I cut all my ties. I told every band I wasn't doing it anymore. I told every label I wasn't doing it anymore, but there's just some buggers in the scene who refuse to listen. And so they said,
sounds like you're one of them.
Yeah. And so I'd still get stuff coming through, and I go, and I really got away with it for about 2 years. And then I slowly, ever so slowly, started getting pulled back in. And I suppose probably about 8 years ago, I started to hit my traps again. Then I took time off. So it took me 2.5 years to write the books. So 2017, I started writing reviews again. At the same time working on the book. So that was slower. And then about 3 years ago, I said, right, I'm going to make a commitment of 14 reviews a week.
Yeah. Never want to rest for music ever, because even I love it. I love the singing, I love the writing, but sometimes I'm just peace and quiet can be nice too. Do you not feel that, or does that just curious, because this is obviously why you can do what you do.
Well, I do take breaks, but then it comes back to the duty bit, which I think is a really good way of describing it, because I come back to the I'm letting people down is how I feel it, because the other thing is now, rightly or wrongly, I have got some sort of reputation, which I still find rather weird, but I'm known. I'm a known persona within the scene. And some people find it's great to get a review from Kev Rowland. I'm just a guy who puts his trousers on one leg at a time than anybody else. And I'm just writing my opinion. And my opinion is no better or no worse than anybody else's opinion.
I think people have respect for somebody when they're prolific and you're constantly turning out. You kind of build up a trust with that person because they're going to be there. They're going to be there. They're going to be there, and they're going to be giving their all. And it gives people the opportunity to see a perspective and to go in and make their own mind up. And when you have that trust built up there, it's a sense of feeling safe. There's a safety in feeling like you think you know somebody, and
Yeah.
that voice or that write up or whatever, and that commitment you're giving to it gives that back. I'd love to have a write up by Kev Rowland, And of course, when I'm going through the progressive underground and seeing all of these write ups that you've done over the years, it's great fun. And that leads me, before we wrap up on this first meeting, that leads me to ask you, what do you want people to get from it?
What I want people to do is to use them as a guide, right? This has never, ever been about Kev Rowland. This has always been about the music. So go into the books, pick at them, read them all the way through, do whatever you want, but make notes of what you find interesting and go and find them. These days, through YouTube and every other thing, you can probably find a lot of this stuff online. Go and investigate, go and find out. A lot of these bands are still going, and they're still playing to the same people that they always play to. Galahad, in the last month, they've released a reissue of an album for 20 odd years ago. Yes. Which I wrote some stuff for the Digipack for, and they Stu and Dean have released an album under a slightly different title, but they are still going. They are still going, and they still have daytime jobs.
I've been blown away by Galahad because they've been on some, because I still get my prog rock stuff, but I get it sent over by freight, so I'm 3 months behind each time I get my prog magazine. Okay. But over the years since I've been here, I've remembered playing Galahad on the little CD that you get sent with each one. And there's been, I can't remember, 2 or 3, but one particular, they've not stopped. They're still going, and they are a very good band. I think they should be more highly rated, personally. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could remember the name of the song, but I've played some of their stuff, and I thought, that is excellent. That is excellent. Yep. That is so good. And I've played it. When you like something, you play it again. Well, I do.
Yep.
And there's several that I think, what great writing. I love it. What great new sounds they're bringing in for them. They're moving,
Yes, they've changed their sound a lot from the early 90s, and they really have moved. And I think the biggest musical change was when Dean took over on keyboards, right. In 97, 98. But Seas of Change, which came out 2 years ago. Very popular album, but it's popular within our scene. And so we're talking about thousands, not tens of thousands or 20s of thousands. And I can remember reviewing Nick Barrett from Pendragon 15 plus years ago, and he was saying even then that the scene had changed. And whereas the old days, they were still, when they brought a new album out, it would be selling X amount and the back catalogue would start popping up again. He said it was totally changed. It was nothing like what it was even in the 90s. So you come through these days, and you and I are of an age where we listen to an album. And I think it's funny, again, coming back to the Marion talk number 3 that I played earlier. I'm always going to have problems with that name. I'm sorry. It's the only time I've ever seen that name.
I'm going to listen to this now, but it's Mary, like Mary, with an E-N.
Right.
Mary N.
Mary N.
Mary N.
Right.
Don't worry.
Okay.
Marion, because
Mary N. Right. So she said that she was saying you've got a song. Yeah. And you ought to get it because everybody listens to individual songs, and they do. I don't. I listen to albums, and I know that there's always been a thing about playing 1 or 2 tracks of an album and you write about it. No. I play the whole thing a couple of times. You know, I have to listen to the whole album. Because sometimes the last track is the one that actually really catches you, and then you hear the rest of the album again and it takes on a different light. You know, you never know. And I'm a big believer that artists, rightly or wrongly, design an album in the way that the songs appear on the album to create a certain flow through effect. Yeah. So I never listen to anything on shuffle. I don't understand how anybody can. But to me, start at track 1, go through to the end.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but however, I'm beginning to embrace the idea, because I'm not as prolific as a lot of other songwriters. I'm embracing the idea of the single song to start with, till it gets to a point of where I would eventually put them on an album, because as we all know, writing an album can take years for some people. And
yeah. When was your last solo album, Tracy?
Well, that solo album. Goodness me, I must have still been in nappies. That's the one I wrote that one for me. But you know, writing my new stuff, and because sort of been, you know, not having a band there, you know, not having the musicians there, and all this technology, it's kind of getting my head around it, and the new life in Australia and a new family. It's taken my time, but doing this is kind of really, hopefully, starting my reconnections with everybody. This is why this is so great hearing from you, because I start to hear things that, gosh, I didn't really realize this, or I didn't realize that, you know what I mean? And it brings all this back to you, and it's just great. But I'm kind of looking at having to go with some shifts and changes just to get myself out there and reconnect with everybody, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, how long it'll take to get to that piece of vinyl, or or on the CD, or whether I release them as as an EP, or I'm kind of trying to really listen to what's going on out there, because there's a lot of different ways you can listen to, but it's constantly interchanging. But I get what you're saying from a feeling point of view, as to how it's that feeling of an album. Oh my God, absolutely. Unlike me, I was actually surrounded by people, and I was the singer that turned up and eventually became part of the songwriting team and had my place, you know. And then when you're suddenly sort of into somewhere differentsville, and you don't have expertise in any of all those other 70 billion other things that took place, you start to truly appreciate what I did at the time, but you really appreciate it when you're on your own. And happy to start out again. But you're looking at all the New Zealand prog stuff over there, so I'm sure we're going to talk about that in the future. So that's going to be great for coming up chats with you. But one thing I want to ask you and go back to on finishing this particular show, I want to get back to Cornish cream cheese and Now come on. No
comparison.
Right, okay, I've got a problem with it, you see. My problem is you, Devonshire people, put the jam on top of the cream. You put the cream on top of the scone and the jam on top of the cream just to make it look pretty, okay?
No, it's because you don't need butter as well. You use cream instead of butter.
Yeah, well, we don't use butter either. Well, I never have. And then we, as Cornish people, with the best clot of cream in the world, Rhoda's got a clot of cream.
You do know that the Tamar is a Cornish river that starts 4 miles from the north of the country, so you can tell it's Cornish because it runs south. So all we need is some guys up there with shovels, and we can turn you into an island, and believe me, they're digging.
And do you know what? We've been flying the flag for that for a very long time, but unfortunately, London won't listen to us.
There's a guy on the farmer's market, and there's no word of a lie, the farmer's market in Oxford, where I live. And first time I went over, he was selling pasties, right? And he had a Cornish flag on the table. And he's selling pasties. And I went, are you really Cornish? And he went, yeah. And he come up with a thick accent. I said, right, 2 large oggies. And he looked at me and I went, yep. So, and honestly, they're proper Cornish pasties. And I'm in heaven, because over here, they put tomato ketchup in pasties over here. It's not right.
I have bought a Cornish pasty over here, and do you know what's inside it?
No.
Mincemeat, carrot. I mean, are you kidding me? Mincemeat, carrot, what do you want, peas? No. If anybody's out there, it's patented actually. And the cornish pasty, you get different pastries, I know, but it's potato, it's onion, it's, well, some people call it swede and some people call it turnip, but it's I think it's turnip. Oh, swede.
Yeah,
That gets a bit
sweet.
confusing, but it's swede. Yeah, it's the yellowy one. That's right. And then it's the proper chunks of beef, you know, and then with a salt and pepper and a splash of water and maybe some a little bit of butter or something like that. And I've gone and they've called it Cornish pasties, and I've had them and I've nearly spewed.
When we have we raise animals, and so when we have the cows knocked over, we keep the skirt for us. So yeah, so the skirt comes out, and my wife said to me, "What do you do with skirt?" I said, "Pasties." My mum always used to use skirt for pasties. That's what we use skirt for. So yeah, and yeah, and you got it right. You don't need any more than what you've just said.
Yeah, but that's what makes it sweet and gives it the particular flavour. And that's what the miners used to take down to the mine, the Cornish miners. And at the other end, they'd have the jam on one end, so they'd have their dessert, you know. And but anyway, back to the cream teas, right? I'm still not satisfied. So cream teas over here, no, the cream is not right. You know, it's as much as they try, it's not right. It's sweet and sickly. It's not this real cream and, you know, and isn't it beautiful? And I have had beautiful Devonshire cream teas. I'm just very upset that you would even try. But anyway, so just to let people know out there, it's scones, or we call scones, or whatever you call them, and they're like a cake or a bun. If you like, and on top you put a dollop of cream. But underneath that, for the Cornish, you would have the jam, and for the Devonshire people, you have the jam on top. You know, so that would be an argument forever, and that's quite fine by me. So have you got any last thing at this present chat that we have that you could say to anybody listening in about the Progressive Underground and the 3 volumes, and anything, a final word you could have about it at this moment? Because I know we're going to delve deeper on other chat sessions, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and fantastic. I think it's just so great, you know, to see what you've preserved here. You've preserved something.
Well, thanks, Tracy. I mean, look, the 3 books have to be considered as one. That's what I will say. I mean, the only difference between volume 1 and volume 2 is literally the alphabet. One is A to H. The next one is I to S. My favorite is actually the third, which is T to Z, then small reviews and DVD reviews. But about half the book is made up of interviews and live reviews of not all the gigs I attended, but all the gigs I wrote about. And now I wish I'd written about all the gigs I'd attended, because it gets to a point where I didn't write about all of them. And I wish I had, but I didn't know I was creating history at the time. You know, I remember, you know, there's reviews in there of Credo at Egham Compasses, you know, little toilets like that around South London. And you're going, I didn't know it was important. I saw Winter at Red Lion at Brentford, and I'll review it in the book. When I turned up, though, I was the only person that when they came on stage, 3 more people came in, and the doorman came and gave me my money back. And they were great.
What a high note to finish on. That is absolutely a gem, fold, darling. I love it. And when you're talking about Credo, you're talking about the same Credo that Mike Varty is in?
Still in. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when they were first called Ad Hoc. Then Mark Colton joined them as lead singer. Then they became Checkered Past. Then they became Credo, and they recorded the first album with a different keyboard player. And to be honest, at the time, it was I won't say it was his band, but he wrote most of the lyrics. But he was what I call a hobby musician. You know, he wasn't a real musician. And then Mike joined. And it was great because Tim Burrell is still one of the most amazing guitarists I've ever met. Fish tried to steal him. Fish wanted to go on tour with him, but Tim had a well-paid day job, so he said no, because he couldn't take the risk. But I remember we were in Mansfield, because I used to get the band gigs, and we were up in Mansfield, and we're going, oh, what are we going to play tonight? And they've come to the set list, and now we'll finish with Faith Healer. Mike had only been in the band a couple of months at the time, and I've never forgotten Mike going, what's Faith Healer? Everybody's staring at him and going, Faith Healer, Sensational Alex Harvey band. And he went, I don't know what that is. Because Mike's main job, and to be fair, it was his main job in Landmark as well. He brought down the average age of the band.
Oh, Mike's brilliant. I mean, he brought a wonderful stability into Landmark, you know, because we all have our personalities, and he was the one that would take me to a side, because with you know, and painstakingly, like Keith Turner did sort of 27 years before, and say, no, Trace, look, yeah, because I felt progressive rock music and the time signatures changes. I didn't need to know them on a heady level. I do things by feel. And I just fell into it and loved it and felt it, and that's what I became. But there was a couple of times when I just couldn't get a time signature change. I'm trying to think of the song. If I can't think of it now, it's going to come up on our next chat. But it drove Mike into the ground that I could not get this. You know, so, you know, like when you're patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time.
Yeah.
It's one of those, and I wrote the part myself.
Oh, that's even better.
No, not the actual music, but sorry.
No, but
the song I wrote, and I wrote
yeah.
how I wanted the melody to go in between that part, and I knew what I meant, but I couldn't actually feel this part when I actually come to doing it. And eventually he got through. He stopped the whole session. He goes, right, Hitchings, that's it. And he would not stop. And I think we must have been stood there for about an hour, and I'd get it right. I'd get it right a second time. Then we go in for the real rehearsal, and I'd get it wrong.
He's amazing in the studio. He really is very good in the studio.
Right. And, you know, I've got to apologise to Mike, because we did tease him about Credo. We used to call it Play-Doh, just to tease him a bit.
You guys toured together as well, didn't you? You and Credo toured together.
Lovely. And a great guitar sound, and, you know, yeah, absolutely. So Mike was going between the two. And I've forgotten about that, actually. Do you know what? I've actually forgotten that. That's absolutely right. I always remember the guitarist. I say always, but you brought that up, and it's like everything's come back to me, like the files come up, you know. But yeah, so, but that's a beautiful, beautiful memory, beautiful high notes. And on that count, Kev, we're going to say, well, to everybody out there, you've been listening to the amazing and prolific writer Kev Rowland, and you can't miss out on these incredible volumes of 3 at the moment, because I have a sneaky feeling there is more on the way. Yeah, and I've heard something on the pipelines about a 4th one. Can you admit that?
Yeah, I'm about halfway through the first proof of the 4th one, because people keep going, well, you haven't featured my band, and I said, well, I didn't know you back then, I've known you since then. You go, well, yeah. So I've actually, yeah, I've started compiling my writings from since I've come to New Zealand.
Yes.
And it'll literally go as far as, you know, I'll come to about 300 pages or so, and I'll go, right, that's the next volume, and then I'll work on the one after that. The difference now, I have it all digitally, so it's not like having to type it up from scratch, but there's a demand out there, and it's nice to be in a book, isn't it, Tracy?
Oh, it's wonderful. I keep turning the pages and finding myself. I feel very, very honoured. But also, I'm finding so many other things in there that are really important, from the bands that everybody really knows to the obscure, and you've captured that, and that's priceless. So thank you for that.
That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. It's all about the music.
Yeah, it's absolutely priceless. So thank you so much for that. And Kev and I are going to be joining up again for other chats. So I hope everybody's absolutely enjoyed this wonderful sort of trip down memory avenue, and going in and out of the ins and outs of life as well. You know, real life happens, doesn't it, in between? And yeah, we still keep going, and we're still here. And, you know, as Marion said, she says, you know, we ain't dead yet. So, and the more wisdom we gather, so all the more reason. So I'd like to thank Kevin very much, and I'm sure he wants to say a good cheerio to you wonderful people out there. Anything to the people out there?
Oh, just go and discover the music. There's so much out there if you look for it. Use these as a guide. If not these, just go out and look for it, because there's awesome music. Just look for it. Support them.
Yes, indeed. And that was lovely, Kevin. And I'm going to say a cheerio to you. And ladies and gentlemen, oh, by the way, Kev, bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye, Kev. And Kev's just gone right now. And you have been listening to Tracy's Prog World. I hope you've enjoyed this show. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It takes me down memory lane. Also, there's always new discoveries, isn't there? So let me know anything that you'd like to know or anything you'd like to add, and we can always put it towards Kev's way, and that will create some more chat later on, I'm sure. So thank you, everybody. Now it's over and out from Tracy's Prog World.